I was lying in a hostel bunk bed in Playa del Carmen. The metal frame creaked every time I shifted. 20-year-old backpackers were partying downstairs. My phone screen glowed in the dark. Bank account, $2,100. Enough for maybe 2 months if I ate nothing but street tacos. Then what? I couldn't go back to Denver. I'd sold everything to be here with her. 3 years earlier, I'd arrived in Mexico with $420,000 and a plan to build something beautiful. Now I had a hostel bunk, and the kind of shame that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. My name is David. I'm 51 years old. This is the story of how I lost everything chasing a dream that was never mine to begin with. Let me go back to where this started. 4 years before I met her, my wife Sarah died. Pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 46. We'd been married for 19 years, no kids. We'd always said we'd travel when we retired, but we never got the chance. After she died, I kept working. I ran a small contracting business in Denver. Residential remodeling, steady work. The business kept me from thinking too much about the empty house we'd bought together. By 2019, I was 48 years old and exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I needed a break. In February 2020, I took a week-long trip to Playa del Carmen, a resort with an ocean view. I wasn't looking for anything except quiet. That's where I met Elena. She was working at a beach club, coordinating events. I watched her handle a wedding party with calm efficiency. When the chaos settled, she sat at the bar near me. We made eye contact. She smiled. "Long day?" I asked. "Every day is long here," she said. Her English was perfect, but I love it. Events, people, making things beautiful. We talked for 2 hours. She was 32, from Mexico City, moved to Playa 5 years earlier. She'd studied hospitality management, now freelanced coordinating private events. She asked about Denver, about my work. I told her about the contracting business, about Sarah. She listened, really listened. "You should come back," she said. "Playa is good for people who need to figure things out." I went back to Denver, back to work. But something had shifted. Elena and I stayed in touch. Messages, then video calls. It felt easy. 6 months later, in August 2020, I went back to Playa. We spent almost every evening together. She told me about her dream, opening a small boutique hotel, something personal, not a big resort, just 10 rooms, a place where guests felt like they were staying at a friend's house. "I've been saving for years," she said, "but property here is expensive." "How much would something like that cost?" I asked. She showed me listings. Small properties, mostly rundown. With land and construction, maybe $250,000 to $300,000. I did the math. I had the life insurance payout, the equity from selling the house. No kids to leave it to. What if this was the thing I was supposed to build? When I flew back to Denver that time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few months, Elena and I talked more seriously about the hotel idea, about us, about what it would mean if I moved to Mexico. "David, this is a big decision," she said during one call. "You don't need to change your whole life for me." But it wasn't just for her, it was for me too. A chance to build something meaningful. In March 2021, I made the decision. I sold my house in Denver for $380,000, closed down the contracting business. Between the house sale and what I had from Sarah's life insurance, I had $420,000 liquid. I flew to Playa del Carmen, one way, in April 2021. Elena picked me up from the airport. "We're really doing this," I said. She took my hand. "We're really doing this." The first month was everything I'd hoped for. We rented a small apartment together. I wasn't working, just exploring, learning Spanish, getting used to life there. Elena kept her event work while we looked for property. We found it in June, a plot of land about 15 minutes outside Playa del Carmen. The area was developing fast. New boutique hotels, eco-resorts. The land was 1,200 square meters, big enough for a small hotel with a pool. The asking price was $110,000. Elena handled the negotiations. We got it for $95,000. That's when the first complication came up. I couldn't own the land outright. Mexican law restricts foreign ownership of land within a certain distance of the coast. There are legal workarounds, trusts called fideicomisos, but they're complicated and expensive to set up. It'll take months to arrange the fideicomiso, Elena explained, and lawyers here charge a fortune. But we need to move fast or we'll lose this property. Someone else is interested. She suggested putting the title in her name temporarily. Once we were married, it wouldn't matter anyway. And we'd been talking about marriage, not in a rushed way, but as something that made sense for us. I hesitated. I'd heard stories, guys who put property in girlfriends' names and got burned, but this felt different. Elena wasn't asking for the money as a gift. She was my partner. We were building this together, and we were going to get married anyway. Okay, I said. Let's do it. We closed on the property in July 2021. The title went into Elena's name. I wired $95,000 from my US account to hers for the purchase. I had the transfer records, the receipts, everything documented. But legally, the land was hers. For a while, everything was fine. We started working with an architect, designing the hotel, 8 rooms, a small restaurant, a pool. We wanted it to feel intimate, special. The construction estimates came in around $180,000. We decided to start with foundation and structure. In September, we hired a contractor, a guy Elena had worked with before. We paid him $35,000 up front to start the foundation. The first few weeks went smoothly. Crews showed up, started pouring concrete. Watching something take shape felt incredible. But then things started slowing down. The contractor said there were permit delays, issues with inspectors. Normal stuff, he assured us. Just part of building in Mexico. We paid another $25,000 in October for materials and labor. Then another $25,000 in November. By December, we'd put $85,000 into construction, and we had a foundation and some framing. Nothing close to a finished structure. The contractor kept asking for more money. Supply chain issues, he said. Labor costs going up. Unexpected problems with the soil. I started getting nervous. I'd been in construction my whole adult life. I knew when a project was going sideways. The pace was wrong. The costs weren't adding up. When I mentioned this to Elena, she got defensive. You don't understand how things work here, she said. This is Mexico, not the United States. Everything takes longer. Everything costs more than you expect. You have to be patient. I wanted to believe her. She knew the local system better than I did. But the doubts stayed with me. In January 2022, 8 months after I'd moved to Playa, something shifted. Elena started working longer hours, coming home late. When I asked about it, she said she was stressed. The hotel project was overwhelming. She needed space. I tried to be understanding, but the distance grew. One night in late January, she came home after midnight. We need to talk, she said. She sat down, wouldn't make eye contact. I don't think this is working anymore. Us, the hotel project, I feel like I'm carrying too much weight. I stared at her. What are you talking about? We're doing this together. No, she said. I'm doing it. You're just here. You don't speak Spanish well enough to deal with contractors. You don't know the local systems. You can't help with permits or negotiations. I'm handling everything, and it's too much. Then let me help more, I said. Teach me. We'll figure it out together. She shook her head. I need to focus on myself right now, on my own future. I think it's better if we take a break. A break. That's what she called it. She moved out 3 days later, took her things, didn't say much, just that she needed time to think. I tried calling, texting. She responded occasionally, always brief, always vague. She needed space. She'd reach out when she was ready. Weeks passed. I kept paying rent on the apartment by myself, kept checking on the construction site. The contractor had stopped working. He said he couldn't continue without more funding, and Elena wasn't responding to his calls either. I finally went to see a lawyer in March. I explained the situation, the land in Elena's name, the money I'd transferred. He listened, taking notes. "Do you have a written agreement?" he asked. "A contract documenting your investment?" "I have transfer records," I said. "Bank statements. That proves you gave her money," he said. "It doesn't prove ownership. Legally, you gave her a gift. The property is hers. There must be something I can do." He sighed. "You can file a civil suit, but it will be expensive. It will take years. And honestly, the outcome is uncertain. Mexican courts favor the person whose name is on the title." "How much?" "Legal fees? Probably $15,000 to $20,000 just to start." I sat there doing the math in my head. I'd spent $95,000 on the land, $85,000 on construction, $180,000 total, gone, and now I'd have to spend more just to try to get some of it back, with no guarantee. I paid the lawyer for the consultation and left. That night, I sat in the apartment and calculated what I had left. I'd arrived in Mexico with $420,000. I'd spent $180,000 on the land and construction. I'd been living on about $2,500 a month for almost a year. Rent, food, transportation, everything. That was another $27,000 or so. I had roughly $213,000 left. Still a lot of money. Enough to go back to Denver, start over, rebuild. But I didn't want to go back with my tail between my legs. I wanted to salvage something, to prove this hadn't been a complete disaster. That's when I made my next mistake. I convinced myself I could finish the hotel myself, hire a new contractor, sell it or run it, recover something. I hired a different contractor in April. Smaller operation, but he seemed honest. To finish the basic structure, he'd need about $55,000. It was a lot, but if I could complete it and sell it, I'd recoup something. I paid him in installments over 4 months. By August 2022, we had walls, a roof, rough plumbing, and electrical. No furniture, no kitchen, no pool, but it was a structure. I listed it for sale, $200,000. Less than I'd put in, but enough to get out without being completely destroyed. No offers, not in August, not in September, not in October. Real estate agents said the location wasn't right. Too far from the beach, too close to cheaper developments. The market was slowing down. Buyers were cautious. I dropped the price to $175,000. Then $160,000. Still nothing. By November 2022, I'd burned through another $70,000. The second contractor, carrying costs on the property, rent, living expenses. I had about $143,000 left. My tourist visa was expiring. I'd been renewing it every 6 months, but the process was getting harder. Immigration officers were asking more questions. How was I supporting myself? What was my purpose in Mexico? I was running out of options. In December, I made the hardest decision. I moved out of the apartment. Too expensive. I found a hostel in the center of Playa del Carmen. $12 a night for a bed in a shared room. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a backpack. The hostel was full of kids, gap year travelers, digital nomads in their 20s. They'd ask where I was from. I kept my answers short, just traveling. I couldn't tell them the truth. that I was 51 years old, living in a hostel because I'd gambled everything on a relationship that fell apart. The property sat there, unfinished, unsold. Every month it deteriorated. Graffiti appeared. Squatters broke in. I hired a local guy to check on it weekly, paid him $100 a month. I thought about Elena sometimes. I'd see her occasionally in town, always from a distance. We never spoke. I tried to find work, but I didn't have a work visa. My Spanish wasn't good enough. And who wants to hire a 51-year-old American living in a hostel? I stretched my money as far as it would go. Street tacos, cheap coffee, no luxuries. I watched my bank account shrink week by week. By March 2023, 2 years after I'd arrived in Mexico, I had $18,000 left. The property was still unsold. The lawyer said even if I won a lawsuit, it would take 3 to 5 years. That's when reality finally hit me. I'd lost everything, not just the money, the time, the belief that I could build something new. I was 52 years old, living in a hostel, down to my last few $1,000s, with a half-finished building I couldn't sell. One night, lying in that bunk bed with the metal frame digging into my back and music thumping from downstairs, I did the math one more time. If I sold the property for whatever I could get, maybe $80,000, and combined that with what I had left, I'd have roughly $98,000. Enough for a plane ticket back to Denver, enough for rent, enough to survive for maybe a year while I tried to find work. But Denver didn't have work for 52-year-old guys with a 2-year gap in their employment history. So I stayed in the hostel, watching backpackers come and go, watching my bank account drain. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all this. They want a lesson, some wisdom that makes the loss worthwhile. I don't have one. What I learned is this: you can make every decision carefully and still lose everything. You can trust someone completely and still get hurt. Mexico isn't the problem. Elena isn't the villain. I blame myself for thinking love and money could buy a fresh start, for ignoring warnings I heard in my own head, for putting everything into something I couldn't legally control. The worst part isn't the money, it's the time. I gave up 2 years chasing something that was never going to work. 2 years I could have spent rebuilding in Denver. Instead, I'm here, in a hostel, 52 years old, trying to figure out what comes next when there's no good option left. If you're watching this because you're thinking about doing something similar, moving somewhere new, starting over with someone you barely know, investing in a dream that depends on trust, just listen to this part. Don't do it unless you can afford to lose everything. Not just the money, the time, the energy, the belief that you're making a smart choice. Because even when you think you're being careful, even when you think you understand the risks, you probably don't. I thought I understood. I was wrong. And now I'm lying in a hostel bunk bed, listening to 20-year-olds party, wondering if $2,100 is enough to last until I figure out what to do next. It's not, but I'm still here, and maybe that's all I've got left.